So good evening, everybody, and welcome to our webinar this evening on profiting from trees on poultry ranges. Thank you very much for sparing your time to come and see what we've got to say this evening. My name is Bosanquet, and I'm going to be chairing the meeting this evening. And along with some of my colleagues on this call, I work for Natural England as part of the Catchment Sensitive Farming Partnership, which was a project set up in 2006 to work with farmers in England to improve water quality, air quality and reduce flood risk on agricultural land. So I'm delighted that we have speakers on the call tonight from England and from Wales. My colleague Byron Davies, who's on the call, is going to do a short introduction and hello in Welsh in a little while. If you have any questions that come up in Welsh, Byron is on hand to help. So as we're all very aware, the farming sector and especially the poultry sector is facing a lot of uncertainty at the moment. And so it's more important than ever that we're looking collectively for practical ways in which the industry can be both profitable and environmentally sustainable. So this evening we're going to hear from two experienced farm advisors. We've got Bridie Whittle and sadly Sue Buckingham, who set up the event, has had to, she has a family emergency going on, sadly. So Ken Downward from Catchment Sensitive Farming is stepping in to do Sue's presentation. And then we have David Brass, who's an experienced poultry farmer, and his woodland advisor, Paul Arkle, who are going to be telling us about how planting trees on poultry ranges has, in their instance, improved productivity, as well as delivering positive benefits for wildlife, for air and for water. And then at the very end, we're going to have a little bit of information about funding streams that you might find useful in England and in Wales. Okay, the webinar is being recorded. As I said at the very beginning, if you'd be so kind as to turn off your videos if you're not one of the speakers, just to save on bandwidth, and also if you can mute yourself, please. And at the end of the session, we will take some questions, so you'll be able to unmute yourself right at the end. If you have any questions or comments as we're going through the presentations, please feel free to use the chat facility. If you're not familiar with MS Teams, it's one of the buttons at the top usually of the screen where it says chat, and you can click on that and type in your chat if you want to. And then when we get to the end of the presentations, we will go through some of those, and our expert speakers can answer your questions as best they can. We'll also open up the microphone, so if you prefer to ask your questions in person, then you're very welcome to. Okay, let me just remember what I need to do now. Yeah, we might, there will probably be some bits that we put in the chat as well, if there are links to bits of relevant information or maps or any links like that. So just keep an eye out on the chat as we go through. Okay, so I'll hand over to Byron briefly now, and then I will introduce our first speaker.
Thank you, Rachel. Diolch yn fawr iawn. Croeso heno i chi gyd I webinar elw o goed ar rhanbarthau ffowls. Os oes gennych unrhyw gwestiynau byddai'n well gennych chi ofyn yng Nghymraeg, please teipiwch eich cwestiwn yn y chat, a byddwn ni mwy nag hapus I cyfieithu nhw ar gyfer ein siaradwyr. Mwyn sicrhau bod pawb yn elwa o'ch cwestiwn, bydd yr atebion yn cael eu darparu yn Saesneg. Diolch yn fawr a mwynhewch y webinar. For the benefit of our English-speaking contingent, I've just simply explained to our Welsh-speaking participants that they are more than welcome to type their question into the chat in Welsh if they prefer, and I will translate them for our speakers. I will now hand you back to Rachel. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr. Mwynhewch y webinar.
Fabulous, Byron. That's wonderful. Okay, so our first speaker this evening is Bridie Whittle. Bridie is a farmer and an advisor. Her interest in agriculture and the environment has led her to her current role as a catchment advisor for the Wye Usk Foundation, a local rivers trust, where she works with farmers to restore the health of our rivers. Most recently, she's been working with free-range egg producers on both sides of the border, offering advice and support to help them protect water quality in the Wye catchment. So over to you. Thank you, Bridie.
Thanks, Rachel. It's very nice to be invited to talk. Probably being a farmer is slightly overstating it. I did farm for a little while. I did have some free-range organic hens, 600 free-range organic hens, which, judging by the scale of the operations I generally see now, seems so tiny. But it was an enterprise that I really enjoyed doing. So yeah, thank you for the introductions. It's really lovely to have this cross-border event, and it's credit to Catchment Sensitive Farming for organising it. It's a great opportunity to hear from David and Paul, who I have seen speak before, and their enthusiasm for trees is contagious, so hopefully you'll be feeling enthusiastic too by the end of the webinar. So just to allay any fears that there may be, the purpose of the webinar isn't to announce any new requirements or demands. I think we are all well aware of the challenges facing egg producers at the moment. So it's just the aim is to help you get the best out of your trees if you already have some, and to provide advice and information if you're thinking of planting some. So as a catchment advisor, my job is to offer support and advice, and occasionally a bit of grant funding when we have it, to help farmers take actions and put measures in place to protect streams and rivers. And one of the projects, as Rachel was saying, that one of the projects I've been working on in the past couple of years has been with free-range egg suppliers. And through the project, I've visited nearly 50 sites across Herefordshire and Radnorshire. And although each site has different challenges and different opportunities, one of the things that is common across every site that I've visited is the challenge of keeping vegetation growing on the range. And this is an easy conversation to have with farmers because it's a priority for the farmers, and for keeping the eggs clean and the birds healthy, and for keeping the shed dry, and countless other benefits. But it's also a top priority for us when it comes to protecting water quality. Next slide, please, Ceri. So why are trees good for us? So we all know that bare soil is bad. I think everybody's got that message. Bare soil is vulnerable to capping and erosion, which can lead to surface runoff, and surface runoff is one of the quickest ways for soil and nutrients to get into the watercourses. And my role as a catchment advisor is to help farmers keep soil and nutrients on their farms and stop them getting in the watercourse. So trees can help in a number of ways. They protect the soil surface from the physical impact of raindrops. They increase the infiltration rates to get the water filtering through the soil rather than running over the surface. So those are sort of the obvious things. The roots and shoots in the soil, so any vegetation growing on the soil, will help to keep it healthy and functioning, and feed it with organic matter, and keep it well structured with plenty of pore spaces so that it can act as a sponge, not only holding onto the water but also critically holding onto the nutrients, and reducing the risk of nitrates and phosphates leaching out into the environment and on into the groundwater. So one of the other reasons I like to see trees in the range is because they have the added benefit of drawing the birds out away from the potholes to make use of the wider range area, and so it reduces the concentration of birds around the house and distributing them further into the range, across the range, so distributing them, and importantly their muck and the nutrients all around the range, and it just slows the build up, or reduces the build up of nutrients in the soils close to the sheds. So those sort of benefits are common across all sites, but there might also be site-specific risks that you might want to consider that could be addressed by trees. So, willow is a very good tree to put in on any wet spots because it has very high evapotranspiration rates, so it can help to dry up waterlogged areas. The picture, if you can see it in this slide, is where a farmer, this is a farmer that I worked with, Sandford Farm, Trevor Waters at Sandford Farm, and he planted trees up the colony fences radiating out from the shed to draw the birds out and off a particularly steep bit of his range that was prone to erosion. Sorry, another thing to say about that slide is that, well, that photo is that he'd chosen to plant them along the colony fence, which is something that I have suggested to quite a few people, just as a way of reducing cost of protecting those trees. So those young trees are up against that fence and they can be protected with wire, and it saves on the cost of those quite expensive tubular guards. So trees are also very useful planted as a part of a dense buffer strip anywhere where there's a risk of erosion, so be it around the edge of the range against a track, or very valuable to us is on any margins against a watercourse. And this has a particular benefit in keeping the soil and the nutrients out of the watercourse. So the ideal buffer would be a combination of grasses and trees, so sort of a graded effect with grasses on the range side of the buffer, shrubs, and then taller trees next to the watercourse. So these can create any kind of dense vegetation will create a physical barrier, helping to trap the sediment and the nutrients. You also have the effect of the increased microbial activity under the trees in the tree roots to help hold on to trap and use up the soluble nutrients that could otherwise leach through into the river channel. And you might want to consider as well, this isn't necessarily going to be suitable for every site, but to maximise the benefit of the buffer strip, if you can consider cutting and carting a crop from the sort of the range side of the buffer strip, perhaps a strip of grass that you can cut and cart for silage, or even look at the possibility of short rotation coppice, willow. So yes, next slide please, Ceri. Next slide, please. Sorry, thank. We've skidded on a little bit there. So the previous slide, please, Ceri. There we go. So that one, I just wanted to slip in there because it's a graphic illustration of all of the benefits of trees for water quality, and I think Ken is going to talk in a bit about ammonia at the top of the diagram there, and then all of those things around the bottom of the tree are things that we've talked about with high infiltration rates, physical barrier to reduce runoff and erosion, mopping up of nutrients and holding on to water and nutrients in the soil. Next slide, please. And then finally, just to sort of wrap up my little bit, I'm occasionally asked by farmers, why would I want to get trees on the range and to encourage birds out onto the range? Surely it's better for you environmental type, they say, with a smirk, if the birds stay in the shed. But I think this slide demonstrates quite clearly why we want to get them outside. And I have seen ranges like this. I've seen ranges with thick with birds, a lot of birds out of the shed and not enjoying the range, and it looks fabulous. And it is what customers are paying for when they choose free range eggs over barn eggs or caged eggs. And it can deliver all of those benefits that I've listed. I don't know, the text isn't very clear against that photo, but there's a whole list of benefits that a well-managed range can deliver. So, you know, what we're trying to do is to help you manage, design, plant up and manage your range in a way that can deliver all of these benefits as well as protecting water quality. So I'm going to hand over to Ken, I think now, who's going to talk about trees and benefits for ammonia. But thank you very much for inviting me to talk, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Bridie. That was wonderful. And yes, just lovely to have your experience from on the ground, because you've obviously visited a heck of a lot of poultry farms over the last few years, so you definitely know what's going on. Okie dokie, so we've now got Ken Downward, who incredibly kindly has stepped in at the last moment to give Sue's presentation. So Ken is Natural England's Senior Advisor on Shared Nitrogen Action Plans, and was previously Air Quality Lead for Catchment Sensitive Farming in the West Midlands. He has worked for many years before this as a Catchment Sensitive Farming Officer, so he brings with him a lot of experience. So over to you, Ken.
Thank you very much, Rachel. So excuse me if I appear to be reading this, but I do need to follow Sue's notes quite closely, really. So we're going to be talking about what Sue's normally doing, which is Air Quality Lead for the West Midlands. And Sue's main focus is working with farmers and advisors to encourage actions that will improve air quality. And generally, we're talking about ammonia in that respect. So today I'm going to talk about tree planting, particularly on poultry farms, as a way of trying to reduce some of that ammonia that's escaping from the farm unit. So we want to raise awareness of how trees can help poultry farmers reduce the impact of ammonia on the environment, and also communities that might be vulnerable to ammonia, and hopefully help the farm business at the same time. So I'm going to briefly highlight air pollution and ammonia losses, why ammonia is a bit of a problem, share evidence about tree planting as part of a practical solution, and signpost to planting design, advice and ammonia reduction calculations. So, next slide, please, Ceri. So, improving air quality. Why would we be concerned about ammonia? Well, there's several reasons really, but elevated levels can be damaging to the respiratory system and also to mucous membranes of both animals and humans. So within livestock units, we would be quite concerned if levels get too high. But of course, if they come out of the unit, then they go into the environment, and the ammonia that enters the atmosphere combines with other chemical species such as nitrogen oxides and sulfur oxides to produce ammonium nitrate and ammonium sulfate, which you will know if you're a farmer, these are both fertilizers. And these also become small particulate matter, or PM 2.5s, which can enter the respiratory system. So they're of concern for that reason, really. There are many other particulates which also can be breathed in, such as small pieces of tyre and unburned soot from exhaust fumes, for example. But these ammonia sulfates and nitrates also contribute to that PM load. PM 2.5s can enter the respiratory system, and that's where the concern is that they can contribute to chronic health conditions and even heart disease, and of course that can affect people's quality of life. When we look at nature, then there is an effect of ammonia gas which moves from the livestock unit in the airstream and eventually finds its way potentially to a protected site or a site that's sensitive to ammonia, and there it can cause direct toxicity to some plants and acidification of the soils in some situations, and also very concerningly is eutrophication. That's where this over fertilizing effect happens on sites which have been for many years in the past without high levels of nutrient. They've been very, very low in nitrogen, and many species of plants and animals have grown up and adapted to those low nitrogen conditions. And now, of course, in modern day farming and agriculture, then humans have created a lot of ammonia and nitrogen, and it's having an effect on these sites. So most of the important nature-rich sites in the UK are above the critical level for ammonia, and that level is where we can't guarantee that those plants will be protected. They begin to suffer from ammonia toxicity and these other effects of eutrophication and possibly acidification. So damage, for example, includes loss of lichens and mosses. They are particularly sensitive to ammonia, these lower plants, and when they absorb rainfall, they would normally have an effect on flooding in the catchment. Lichens and mosses, particularly those that are living on trees, epiphytes, then we actually change the nature of the flood response within a catchment, and we get much faster runoff than we would normally get if the trees were covered in lichens. So next slide, please, Ceri. So where is the ammonia coming from? Well, the national picture shows that most ammonia in the UK is from beef and dairy sector, and this is followed quite closely by the poultry sector. And then you can see the other sectors there. My eyesight's not good enough to see it on my screen, but hopefully you can see it. but if we consider the poultry sector, really, Herefordshire, Shropshire and Powys have a concentration of poultry, which probably pushes us higher than the national average for that reason. And therefore, we tend to get higher ammonia emissions from that productivity in this area. There are methods for reducing agricultural emissions, and these are many and varied, but they include nutrients that the livestock are actually eating, if we can control those, and the amount of ammonia, amount of nitrogen that they're taking in, and the amino acids. Air scrubbers, slurry store covers, low emission slurry spreading equipment by injection or use of trailing hose or trailing shoe. These are some of the things that we can do to reduce ammonia emissions from the farm and keep that ammonia where we want it, really. But planting trees is another way. It's a kind of an end of pipe solution, if you like, where you can mop up some of the ammonia that's got away. It's quite a sticky gas, and therefore it adheres to leaves and to trees as that air passes from livestock housing, or, for example, in poultry ranging, as we've heard about, then it tends to stick to trees, and a certain amount of it will be taken up by them. So researchers have identified that trees can indeed intercept ammonia, and two important considerations. The first, the ammonia plume needs to be engulfed into a wooded area, and the front of the belt should be relatively open to allow the air to go into the trees. And then secondly, the back and the sides of that wooded area needs to be relatively impenetrable. So we talk about a backstop, if you like. It's a more densely planted area with a tree canopy, and the bases and sides of the trees are much closer together as far as possible. Airflows are then forced upwards when they hit the backstop within the tree canopies, through the tree canopy, and they maximize mixing, interception and dispersion of the exiting air higher up into the atmosphere. So we're effectively diluting what is left when it comes out of the tree shelter belt. Planting upwind of a facility, a livestock unit, would remove some of the ammonia by reducing the airflow over the unit, and we could be looking at about 25% reduction. But planting downwind can recapture ammonia by this absorption or this sticking effect that I've spoken of. So the height and size, rough surface area, the increased contact and this mixing and dispersion effect, we could be looking at up to a 60% reduction in the emissions that would be coming from outside of that shelter belt. So next slide, please, Ceri. So there has been a CSF partnership looking at research into ammonia reduction from trees, rather, not cheese. It's called the ART project, and initially it started with 4 poultry farms, a poultry and a dairy farm, and then different sizes of units, tree ages, shed numbers, and the length of tree belts which were examined. So if we just move on to the next slide, please, Ceri. So we're going to look at this particular poultry shed. It's an 11-year-old woodland ranging area. That's quite important because the age, obviously, we need these trees to grow. So if they're too young, they won't have the same effect. It's a matter of time in that respect. So at this site, they set up ammonia measuring point transects through different combinations of range and tree planting. So if we look at the first transect, this actually goes through I think you might have to move it on here, Ceri, just once. That's it. So the first transect is between 4 and 5, points 4 and 5. So that was a 35-metre open transect. There were no trees in that particular part of the range, and this resulted in a 40% reduction in ammonia. Now that's purely based on, as you travel through space, you reduce the amount of ammonia because it becomes more dilute. But if we look at the next one, which is 0.6 and 7, Then this had a 35-metre tree transect. So this was covered in trees, and that produced a 59% reduction in ammonia. So you can see it's going up. If we look at transect 8 and 9 at the bottom there, this is 50-metre transect through the trees, and here there was a 74% reduction in ammonia. So that's really just outlining that you get this reduction with space, but you also get a reduction as the ammonia sticks to the tree surfaces and it's taken out. So next slide, please, Ceri. This is just planting and design. The key design features for tree planting are understood, and they can be found on the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology Farm to Trees website. We'll include a link shortly. And it includes features such as a 20-metre minimum depth in order to capture ammonia, an open understory with 3 to 4 metre tree spacing, that's the open part, and then a backstop, which is the closed up area, with a maximum of only 2 metres tree spacing to form that backstop. Okay, next slide, please, Ceri. So the ammonia reduction calculator is available online. I think that's the link there at the bottom of the slide, yeah. And so that's run by Forest Research Agency and the Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, and it's an ammonia reduction calculator, and it also enables you to look at the design for the different locations and for most suitable tree species for the area that you're planting in. And it allows for modelling of changing length and design of different tree shelter belts. On the right there, the percentage ammonia recapture against time. So you can see, obviously, as those trees mature, you get greater potential ammonia reductions. So next slide, please, Ceri. So tree planting on poultry ranges. Tree planting on poultry ranges has significant potential to intercept ammonia. Trees can capture ammonia and disperse what remains higher into the atmosphere, which can have a diluting effect from housing and ranges. It can potentially reduce ammonia concentrations and nitrogen deposition to nearby sensitive habitats. And it is essentially a complementary measure to accompany others like nutrient advice, good management practices, coverings, soil nutrient management and low emission spreading. Intercepting ammonia could go a small way to help reduce the ammonia available for particulate formation as well. Though I have to say, ammonia is far in excess. So it would, it may have an effect locally, but overall, we'd have to bring ammonia down quite a lot to reduce the amount of particulate. Tools available to support modelling on farm are free from Forest Research and CEH, as mentioned, plus potential added benefits to bird health and welfare, which could improve performance and provide better environments for wildlife. Okay, I think that's the end of my part of it. Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ken. It's really helpful to have it all explained, all this sort of complicated science made a bit more understandable. And you've also made me want to plant some cheese. I think there must be something on your minds tonight. Maybe we can do that next if the trees fail. Anyway, thank you. So I'm going to hand over now to David Brass. David is CEO of the Lakes Free Range Egg Company, and he began planting trees on his family farm 25 years ago. He champions the benefits of trees on poultry ranges and understands the commercial, welfare and environmental benefits that this offers. At least 20% of all the Lakes Free Range Egg Company poultry ranges now have tree cover, which is absolutely fantastic. So we're really pleased to have you here tonight, David, and over to you.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you very much. Yes, we have about on our own farm probably 155,000 birds, 30,000 organic, and across the company just short of 2 million birds on 80 further farms, about 125 different units, and all of those have trees planted. On our own journey, could I have a next slide, please? Our own journey kind of started 25 years ago, just by noticing that chickens didn't go out in open spaces, but they were always found under, if there's a big oak tree in the middle of a field, they were always found under it. So we decided to plant some trees. And over the years, we've been, along with Paul, developing a planting system and probably involved in nearly all of the research that's been done on benefits of trees to poultry in one way or another. And the list there, I don't need to go through it. You can see in all those, some of them have been covered. Actual percolation rates, you never see wet ground, up to 60 times what you get in normal ground, so massive benefits of trees. Economic benefits are significant. Ranging benefits we'll talk about later, and some of the others we can talk about later as well. Next slide, please. For us, it was a journey. Like I say, we first observed that birds would go out and sit under a tree, but wouldn't go out in the open space. And at that time, which was probably 1997, we're the largest specialist free-range egg packer in the country, so you couldn't be making much of a story about free range if they weren't going outside. So we started to plant trees, and it was a bit of a journey actually. The first trees we planted with Paul as my advisor. Well, frankly, I think Paul would agree were a disaster. We planted them too close, too dense, grant funded, so it was random spacing, a bit like Forestry Commission type planting. Paul didn't know poultry, I didn't know trees, and it didn't work. But 25 years on, we're still talking to each other, and actually it's a symbiotic relationship now. We've learned the lessons, and quite happy to share those lessons with anybody that cares to want to talk to us about it. Next slide, please. What were the lessons? Don't plant them too dense. 2,200 per hectare was what Forestry Commission recognised. Too dense for poultry. It has been talked about planting them 4 metres and 2 metres. We plant them in rows now, 4 metres between the rows, 2 metres between the trees within the rows. And that's simple enough. It just allows the farm to look after them. You can drive up and down the row with a topper to clear the grass so you don't get hens laying eggs outside. So it's much easier to look after them in the rows, and it works just as good. In fact, Paul will probably mention there's some biodiversity benefits actually. We always put tree guards around them if the hens have access, minimum of 900 millimetres. We prefer 900 rather than 1.2s actually. Because if they're any lower than that, the hens peck the leaves out as they come out of the top of the tree tube and they'll kill them. It's quite simple, but we've learned that lesson. The other lesson is, for the farmers of you out there, farmers ain't foresters. Get advice about it. We think we can grow stuff, and actually trees, they're relatively simple to grow. There's no major management needed, but it can be specialist, so it's best to talk to somebody about it. We tend not to plant them in clumps anymore. Grade 3 agricultural land tends to grow trees quite nicely. So if you plant them in clumps and then you get things like ash dieback, you have to fell the whole clump so the big bald patch appears in your planting. So we tend to plant them just as in singles or maybe 2 in a row next to each other. We plant 20% fast growing, so you get cover quickly. And what you get with planting in rows is you get throughout the complete planting, you get woodland edge effectively because you've got openings in it. So biodiversity increases massively. And the ones that we added to the list relatively recently is carbon and ammonia. Next slide, please. What benefits you get, again, they've been listed before, probably go into a little bit more. You get better welfare, you get less mortality, more Class A eggs. We did the science on that probably 15 years ago now. 2% less mortality, 2% more Class A eggs. For those of you who want the maths on that, current egg prices, you're probably looking at better off by about £5,000 a year. And what you've got to remember with that is, for the first 5 years, trees take a bit of looking after. For the next 5 years, they take a tiny bit of looking after. And for the next 150, they do it for free. Compared to ammonia scrubbers that they'll cost you 100 grand in the first place and then cost you 20 grand a year to run, as well as dealing with toxic chemicals like sulfuric acid and the like. So brilliant for absorbing ammonia. Environmentally, CO2 is another one of the things that we'll get to more of a measure. We haven't done much with it, to be fair. We're just starting to carbon calculate, but it will be something else going forward. Biodiversity, we've done the work with that actually was funded by the Woodland Trust, and Paul and myself and the team did quite a bit of work over 5 years of biodiversity. And the other things that you can get if you're into that type of thing is biomass. So after sort of 15 years, you start thinning the trees out and chopping them down, and we hit the factory with them. Is what we do. And apart from that, they look nice. They're there for 150 years. You leave something. Next slide, please. This is kind of a detail that we've come out with. It's a bit of a simple slide, but it's a detail of what we've come out with after 25 years of experience and working with CEH over the last few years. Slightly different to the planting type of plan that CEH will be on as part of their advice. The difference is that CEH will be planting purely for ammonia reduction. They're not looking at other things that you maybe need for looking for hens, whereas we have a broad picture of biodiversity and everything for the prominence of what we do. From that one, if you can see on the slide, we're assuming the wind's coming from the left. The little orange box is the chicken shed, and then the green area is the planted area that's downwind of the chicken shed. Again, once you get outside 100 metres of trees, you don't need the backstop that was mentioned earlier on. I don't like backstops; they look horrible. They're just pine trees around a nice deciduous woodland. Do you really want them? Like after 100 metres, you don't get any more benefit of the backstop because all the ammonia has gone up through the canopy anyway. So what we've got there is that the rows of trees curving around the building, which you can sort of see the blue lines showing that at 4 metres apart. And then as you start to get a bit further downwind, the dark green clumps are still within rows, not actually planted as clumps, but within rows, you plant maybe 15 or 20 pine trees next to each other. So you get this clumping effect. And then further down, a bit sort of 60 metres away, you'll end up with a deeper, thicker clumps of pine, but not entirely on the outside of the planting, so it doesn't look like a pine forest. Then outside that, which is much more of a marketing tool for us as a company and other companies, is you have 50% dappled sunshine canopy, which is very good for biodiversity, invertebrates and bats and the like. It's very good environment for them. Next slide, please. And this is, if you're sat in this sunny area looking back towards the chicken shed is at the back of the slide, so hidden behind all the trees. Then you get the dense canopy for the first 50, 60 metres. And then again, don't hang your hat on that. It'll feed any farm. That's what we do as a nicety out to 100 metres, but it doesn't have to be like that. Any trees are a benefit. And then this area is on the outside edge where you get the dappled sunshine and the chickens are roaming about in that. Next slide, please. And so what I've kind of said is you have a broad palette. If you're planting trees, there's nothing that you can do wrong. You can do things better, but any tree is better than no tree, frankly, for poultry. For a lot of reasons, economic performance we kind of talk about. There are some farm limitations, such as maybe on heavy land you have drainage. But if that's the case, you map the drainage and make sure you plant the trees in the spaces between the drain runs. It can be done, it just needs a bit of effort. The biodiversity is something that people look at more and more from an image point of view and specific high value brands, which is where I would suggest the industry needs to be going, or if in a discerning part of the industry, because you make more money from them. The ammonia mitigation is probably key and will be more so as the Clean Air Act comes into force. By 2030, you'll be expected to have reduced your ammonia by, I think it's 15%, and going on between that 2040, 2050 to reduce it a whole stack more. Trees will grow along with that and do that for you. The CO2 is something that people aren't counting as yet, but it will have a value, and again, it already has for somebody that's planting lots of trees in it. A unit level of probably, I think the last sale was £16 a unit, so it's something that we thought about as well. And what you also get, which is coming to the fore, is you get more birds ranging, a lot more birds ranging. That will help because you get less stress on the chickens, and again, it's science that's was published, which I can let you have a copy of if you wish, that's showed that you get less feather pecking. I don't know if any of you that follow politics, but the Conservatives of all people, the Conservatives welfare group in Parliament published a paper last week wanting instant stopping of beak tipping. So it's something that ain't going to go away, and within 5 years we will have no beak tipping in the UK. Planting trees, getting more birds outside reduces the chance of feather pecking. So it's another one of those things that the business is pushing towards, where we need to be going in the future. I haven't mentioned agroforestry. We have some producers who do that, plant apple trees and make the most awful cider known to man, but that's a different story. But if it's no reason why it can't be done. I don't think the only trees you wouldn't plant are yew trees, probably. The trees we tend to plant are just Paul comes and looks and sees what's the best for the biodiversity in the area, which largely is what trees are already growing in your area, and plant that. But like I say, you can, if there's somebody local who wants agroforestry, more than happy to do that. We have some in Fife that are looking at fruit trees, but it's not something that we say particularly. The benefits they give to the poultry is the main thing. That's kind of me, I guess. Just to prove hens don't go up trees. Next slide, please. There's a hen up a tree. And it is, from a farming point of view, it makes your life a whole stack better, a whole stack easier. I couldn't more strongly recommend it.
That's fabulous. Thanks very much, David. Can I just ask that everybody puts themselves on mute, because I seem to be a bit echoey at the moment. Thank you very much. Yeah, loads of food for thought there, David. Thank you for sort of bringing it to life for us. And if anyone has any questions for David on the practicalities later, then just hold them in your mind for now. OK, so our next speaker is Paul Arkle. And Paul is an experienced farm advisor who previously worked as a FWAG team leader in Cumbria and the Northwest before setting up an independent advisory service for farmers, the Cumbria Farm Environmental Partnership. His career highlight has been working with David, helping free-range egg producers manage trees on poultry ranges to maximise the benefits for productivity and for the environment. So over to you, Paul.
Right. This technology works. I've taken control. Can everybody see that slide all right? Or can they get, are they getting the whole, the ones underneath as well?
No, that's perfect, Paul.
All right, yeah. So just sort of following on from David, like I say, it's we've worked together for 20 odd years or more. We've both been on the steep learning curve, but it's part of the sort of satisfaction of it is it's sort of that ongoing relationship to allow our sort of both, you know, incorporate both our experience and build on that year on year really, and throughout that keep an open mind. You know, they sort of have a fairly good planting scheme. It works well, but we don't sort of rest on our laurels. You know, sort of latterly we're looking at the ammonia thing, and certainly from the talk earlier, and we were involved in research. You can see that has that benefit, but we are on a learning curve, and also working with the one of the key benefits really has been working with the sort of producers year on year. A fairly unique approach that David has, that he likes us to go out after designing planting, you know, when it's been done, check it's been done okay, but also working year on year with the farmers to make sure that that planting is a success. I think the producers appreciate that as well. Like I said, they're not foresters, so we're moving them into some unfamiliar territory in a lot of cases, and it does seem to help, and I say it's very rewarding. So obviously, key thing we're looking for a range of objectives, and it seems to be expanding every few years as another element that we try and incorporate into that. Let's say latterly ammonia particularly, but initially look, you know, basically for physical cover in it for the hens. But we want, when David first got in touch with us about that, and that, you know, we want some help with tree planting on ranges, I thought, well, trees have so many benefits. Let's see if we can optimize that. So from the outset, the approach has been have clear objectives of what we're doing, have a good assessment of the site, the layout, the spacings and species and things on that site, and especially overcome this sort of fit and forget approach to tree planting. People see young saplings and things self-set and think, oh, that's it, you just let them go. But it's that aftercare is the one we really emphasise, and there can be a lot of wasted effort without that, but a huge amount of satisfaction and success with it. And then obviously, because we've been involved for so many years, we're looking at long-term management as well, for those to sort of optimise the benefits as far as we can. And over the years, we've done, you know, sort of reflected on how our successes and failures, if you like. So, you know, one of the things we explored was farmer attitudes to trees, because we're talking to 50, 60 sort of producers, and there's quite a range of attitudes. So we did a survey with some support from the Woodland Trust, and that was quite revealing. Sort of confirmed our thoughts, but it was quite good to do that. And then, like I say, that ultimately, if we get it right, the benefits are commercial and environmental, and they're the ones we've got to focus on. So, David sort of mentioned the sort of layout, and this is an example of one of the planting plans we did a couple of years ago. And ideally, you're planting downwind of things. Obviously, you're constrained by the farm, the site where the shed is, because access is obviously important and it depends where the road is. But that's just a sort of fairly typical design. We want that the trees around the shed to get the hens out. And latterly, we've incorporated a backstop where we're limited in terms of space out from the shed, and that backstop to try and reduce ammonia emissions. As David said, some of the ranges have like 100 metres of tree planting out from the shed, and working with CEH, they said, well, the benefit of the backstop is fairly negligible at that. It's actually the sheer depth of trees that provide that the benefit that we're after anyway. So it's a site-by-site basis. And one of we were talking earlier about the benefits of trees in terms of protecting water quality. On that range there's you'll see a little bit of outlying planting to the southeast, and that was a bank running down to a water course. So to get the 20%, rather than just expand around the shed, because we knew we had the cover there, we included that. So that expanded the river corridor bit and put a fence along that to sort of improve the sort of connectivity of the river corridor and protect it from sort of other farming operations as well. One of the key things, and as a flag advisor, it was sort of right from the outset, trees are great, but in the right place with the right species. So what, as well as in some cases, we will say, avoid planting if the sites are particularly sensitive. Particular example was this one. It wasn't actually a free-range hen site, but it's the same potential risk. It was on a dairy farm, and the dairy company actually encouraged the farmer to plant trees, and it planted quite a lot across the farm at various sites on steep banks and things that weren't going through. But this one was unfortunately particular species rich, and I think it ended up in the Telegraph as a story, and so we want to avoid that. Trees are right in the right place, but we want to avoid sensitive sites. Similarly, in some cases on historic sites as well. So that sort of building up that relationship with the farmer, the sort of producer, is important, and having a good understanding of the site. And as I say, also whether that there's sort of quite a lot of sites we go to expand over the years, so we've got to take that into account. So there's all those things, a bit of thought that goes into it before we start getting our spades out and putting trees in the ground. And as David said, in terms of the number of trees, like a lot of agricultural industries, that sort of there's a trend upwards. In terms of economies of scale, some of the early planting schemes were small scale and easily managed by the sort of producers. We would do tree planting training days and things like that. So the one on the left, that's perfectly manageable. A little bit of aftercare that can be incorporated into the day-to-day management of that. When you get onto the more sort of extensive ranges, this was one on the right. It was one of the ones that used for the ammonia experiments, the research. And on that scale, because of the cost involved, to get that 20%, we sort of recommend maybe that they look at getting a forestry contractor, tree planting contractor, and also particularly with that, make sure that any contracts for planting have that sort of ongoing advice and support, and beating up, so that the contractor has that incentive to get it right as well for the farmer. And it's interesting because on hen range, I do a lot of tree planting schemes with farms, some just for purely aesthetic purposes, others like this commercial, want to get it right. and it's interesting on hen ranges. There's a fairly unique set of pressures, really. Anybody that knows hens will know how curious they are, how kind of merciless they are when they're looking, particularly when they're foraging. So that sort of tree protection is very important. Tree tubes well down into the ground so that they can't undermine them. And as David said, at least sort of the 90 centimetres high so that they can't jump up and pick the leaves, or we end up with a lot of shaving brushes. So that is important. And then also like exposure on sites as well. We've got to emphasise that with the farmers. So that sort of annual visit that David sort of encourages us to do is important in that respect. That sort of keep that encouragement going, if you like. And this is sort of very typical site. So design that, and the farmer will then go out and do that. But it's interesting. A lot of farms, they do perhaps end as a diversification measure. Add another enterprise to the farm. There's quite a few where they've been able to bring another generation in, sons or daughters into the business by having a free range hen enterprise, free range egg enterprise. But the one thing is when you sort of create the range and they see a lot of grass, that's such an inborn tendency to want to graze it rather than cut it, and you can waste a heck of a lot of time and effort. And so I think if I was doing a prescription, I would say keep sheep out for at least 5 years, even a few tups or something like that, rams, which is we'll use something of it. They can do a lot of damage in a very short space of time and end up being back to square one. This was actually quite an exposed site where a neighbouring wood have been felled. So it isn't just sheep, it was wind as well. And I was there, and there's quite a lot of deer. But you've got to keep that sort of aftercare going, particularly in the first few years, or it can be frustrating for the farmer and for David and myself. And these are sort of things, removing tubes in time so the trees aren't constrained, fixing tubes that have been knocked over, or and checking also one of the things we do particularly check for failures, because like David said, we don't want gaps within that canopy, particularly around the shed. So those sort of things, and doing things timely. That's actually a cable tie. The bottom left picture is a cable tie that somebody hadn't removed, and it shows on these very good sites trees grow quickly, so it's important to keep an eye on them year on year to make them established. So we do when we do an aftercare visit, we will send a sort of letter with some details of tasks that the farmer would be encouraged to do, just to keep on top of things. And these are the sort. I did a sort of straw poll of what sort of advice we were doing most commonly, and sort of things like removing redundant tree tubes. A lot of these trees do go quite quickly. They're often on agriculturally improved fields, so that they get away quite well. Restaking, especially if there's been sheep, but even with winds, anybody that plants trees will know stakes occasionally have knocked in, and by the first winter they've often snapped. So keeping an eye on those, and then replacing dead trees, because we want that 20% cover across the range in the longer term. And some other work that we did, working with the Woodland Trust, they said when we're doing the visits, they sort of paid towards a little research project, talking to farmers about what they felt, what was their overall attitude to trees, and trees on the farm. And it confirmed our suspicions. It's generally very positive. There's something tangible about trees in the right place, as long as they aren't causing problems and things. The farmers are generally positive about that. I think they up in Cumbria with a lot of family farms, so they have a long-term link with those farms as well, and they see that as kind of a legacy in a lot of cases, talking to them now. So if you build on that sort of positive attitude and work with them, then it can reap dividends.
One more minute more, sorry.
Okay, yeah. So, and one of just in terms of the pressures on farms, it's often labour, and like I say, on the bigger schemes, it makes sense to talk and incorporate professional help probably. I'm just going to move on. So we've got a lot of well-established schemes, and the Woodland Trust also went on to support a biodiversity survey of these ranges. We've gone from open grassland sites to sort of tree cover that, like, basically because of the rows, we get a very good structural diversity into the woodland edge. So we did a 4-year study after a 1-year pilot to look at what was on there. So a mix of bird, bat, butterfly, moth, vegetation service on basically on sites from new planted up to 8, 9, 10 years old, very quickly. And so thinking about these, going from bare sites, bare grassland sites, 59 species of bird, bats on all the ranges that we surveyed, and talking to the producers that were on all the ranges, absolutely superb for bats because they also support a lot of invertebrates and things, 102 species of moths. Ground vegetation is more structurally diverse than grassland as well. And let's say the woodland, essentially woodland edge canopy, adds a lot more diversity to that. So that effort into to get the trees established. So this is typically this is a couple of years, and then this is what we're aiming for in the longer term by having that ongoing relationship, and like I say, still learning as we're going along as well. Okay.
That's wonderful. Thanks, Paul. It's just lovely seeing all those photos and pictures of all the stuff coming back, and yeah, that's a really good point about planting trees in the right place, isn't it? But it obviously has been very successful where you've done it, so thank you for sharing that, and we'll be able to take some of those questions very shortly. So we're just briefly going to have a little bit of information on some potential funding streams that some farmers might be interested in. We're going to start with Ceri Meehan, who works for Catchment Sensitive Farming. Ceri's just going to talk a little bit about the support available to farmers in England. Thanks, Ceri.
No problem. So I'm stepping in for Sue very quickly on this one. So there are some funding opportunities through countryside stewardship, both through our mid-tier and higher tier schemes and through our capital grant scheme, which you can get catchment sensitive farming support for. So Catchment Sensitive Farming is a programme between Natural England and the Environment Agency to improve water and air quality. So there are certain items that we can support related to what we've been discussing this evening. So around tree planting and the capital items associated with that. We also offer advice on farm infrastructure and land options such as riparian management zones and things like that. If you want more information on that, it's worth checking out our website. If you just look up Catchment Sensitive Farming on your internet browser, it will take you to our site where you can find out how to contact your local officer and what we offer. But alongside funding for actual work and items, we do provide specialist technical advice, including a visit and report around woodland for air and water. So that would be somebody who would come out and they'd help you identify opportunities on your farm to benefit water quality, flood risk management and air quality objectives. So they'd work with you on that, and they'd also help identify opportunities for advice and funding, so they direct you towards the most appropriate source on that. So yes, do check out our website for some more information. So as well as countryside stewardship and catchment sensitive farming, there is the England Woodland Creation Offer. So this does also have grants towards air quality and woodland. So again, I'd recommend getting in touch with your local woodland officer and having a look at their website to see the details, the grants they've got available. But that will cover capital costs up to around £8,500 per hectare, plus maintenance payments as well. So there's a few different funding opportunities out there. I will hand on to Farming Connect, who will highlight some of the ones that are available, hopefully over the border in Wales.
Thanks, Ceri. Yes, so of course, for those of you who know about catchment sensitive farming, it's a partnership that works in England. So I'm pleased to say that we've also got Cath Price on the call, who's Poultry Technical Officer for Farming Connect in Wales. Cath's going to give us a little bit of information about funding on that side of the border. And I believe Geraint Jones and Peter Jackson may be on the call as well. They might want to just say a couple of things as well.
Thank you. Yeah. So as you said, I'm Catherine Price, and I look after poultry within the technical team at Farming Connect. So Farming Connect is a very broad. It offers many different services, but some of the ones I've just pulled a list together of services that I think might be beneficial to some of you on the call. So if you're eligible, if you live in Wales and you're eligible to register with Farming Connect, we can offer you a woodland surgery, which is a 1-hour digital, so over the phone or a video call to discuss your woodland. So for example, your range, shelter belts, or if you have other woodland on the farm that you'd like advice on, and then you can send your photos or videos of the range through beforehand if that would be helpful. This surgery is mainly delivered through Peter Jackson of FWAG, who is also on the call, as you've said, and that's completely free of charge. There's also other surgeries available which might fit in with some of you. One of them is an infrastructure surgery, so that's again a digital offering. You can have up to 2 1-hour sessions, and the first could be, for example, to calculate your manure storage capacities for your farm and discuss the new control of agricultural pollution regs, which is the new sort of Pan Wales NVZ. Recommended specialists to host the sessions include Keith Owen from Quebec, Charles Bentley from ADAS, and Ian Murphy from ADAS, or there are others available as well. And then the second 1-hour session could be to calculate your nitrate loading and share your knowledge on how, or improve your knowledge on how to fill out the forms. Obviously they can't fill them out on your behalf, but you can just learn a bit more about that. And then the recommended specialists for those second sessions include Charles Bentley again, or Becky Jones from Quebec again. Otherwise, there was a little bit of information on those new regs. Apparently under the new regs, there's a maximum of 170 kilograms of nitrogen produced per hectare, which has to include all your animals on farm. It's not my area of expertise at all, but I've been passed this information on. So to put this into context, a 32,000 bird laying unit would need 105 hectares without any other animals so on the farm. So it's quite a lot to get your head around, and it's something that I'm learning about as a farmer myself. So yeah, it's just interesting, and that is, as I say, that is offered through Farming Connect to have these specialists for free. So it's definitely worth doing, I think, if you can. There are other surgeries available as well. So energy efficiency through Chris Brooks, staff management, and then there's other surgeries, like I said, financial planning, accountancy, succession, marketing and diversification, carbon footprinting. And then the training window is currently open to apply. It closes 5 p.m. on the 27th of May. There's lots of training available through that. So it's 80% funding on a lot of these. So the Lion training passport for biosecurity, security and egg handling, poultry welfare management, poultry welfare operative, preparing for IPPC regulation. So that would cover quite a lot of your environmental elements as well. Woodland management for conservation and planting and establishing woodlands. There's also the safe use and application of slurry training. So if somebody wants to understand the rules, there's a full day course where the morning is with Keith Owen talking through the regs and best practice, and then in the afternoon with Chris Duller calculating your application rates and going through the paperwork, like similar to the surgeries. And then the final thing you'll be pleased to hear about, sorry, I'm waffling on a little bit, but there is also mentoring as well. So it's up to 15 hours of one-to-one mentoring with your chosen mentor. And we've got some poultry specialists to choose from. It can be in person or over the phone, or a combination of both, and that's completely free of charge as well. So the best way, if you were interested in any of those, is for you to contact your local development officer, which go to the Farming Connect website, and that is the page that's up on the screen now to find your local development officer and get in touch with them. And then, as you said, we've got Geraint Jones on the call as well, who's our forestry technical officer as well. Thank you.
Kath. Thanks, Cath. That's helpful. We obviously want to get on to some questions, but Geraint and Peter, is there anything that you wanted to say briefly?
Hello. Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, just to talk about, I think the grant side of in Wales, if you hear a little bit what's going on in England. It's a bit of a state of flux in Wales in terms of the grants. There is a sort of new woodland grant coming out. Under the old one, you were not allowed to mix poultry and trees to get a woodland creation grant, much to my annoyance and battling to try and make it otherwise. It's just not possible. The new grants coming in, I guess watch this space. There should be some details coming out in July. The only thing it is current from the Welsh Government is a small grant scheme, and that sort of maybe is some help, but you can only have a planting 10 metres wide away from a boundary, so it'll only be part of the solution. I noticed that someone mentioned the Woodland Trust, and that's certainly another source of funding we're thinking about, and they subsidise trees and guards. You'd be getting something like sort of 75% off the costs. And if you go to the Woodland Trust website, there's all the information there, and that would certainly be worth looking at. And you'd also get some advice from someone who knows something about it as well.
Thank you, Peter. That's really helpful. Okay, well, thank you ever so much to all of our speakers for all of that information. Hopefully we've all got stuff whirring around in our minds now. There hasn't been anything specific that's come through in the chat in terms of questions, but if anyone would like to ask a question of our speakers, either collectively or individually, if you'd like to put your hand up now, I'll have a look. Geraint, you've got your hand up. Sorry, you probably wanted to say something.
Oh, no, it's okay. Thank you. Yeah, I really enjoyed presentations. Fantastic, really. And it's just maybe something for Dave. Dave Brass. I'd argue that he's already doing agroforestry, in integrating tree planting with livestock. But I also wanted to ask him, has he done anything with biochar with regards to in the sheds with absorption of ammonia, or even trying to mitigate against the red mite populations?
Easy answer to that, Greg. No, sorry, nothing at all.
Okay, no, I just is there any evidence out there that, or any studies been done at all? Paul, would you know?
Not in terms of that. I work with a chap from Natural England quite a lot, and we were chatting about that the other day. But we're both just sort of getting to grips with it, really. But where like he's into regenerative farming and so on. So ask me in a few months.
Okay. Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you very much for that. Yes, it's one of those hot topics, isn't it? So I'm sure if anything develops, then we will come and update you. Peter, yes, you've got a couple of questions.
Yeah, these are sort of technical questions because I've been involved a bit in designing some of these schemes. The first is about the tree shelters. Do you think 75 centimetres would be enough, or would it have to be a minimum of 90 centimetres?
It's amazing how high hens can jump, David, isn't it?
Yeah, it's 750s. No, it's a bit short. 900 is about as low as we want to go. What you tend to find is in early spring, as the birds just been let out again after AI, and the leaves are just coming over the top of the tube. They just see that little leaf flapping, and they just have to jump up and eat it. And it's like Paul says, you end up with short brittle brushes sticking out the top of the tube. So But if you go to 1.2, it's just a bit higher. They easily get knocked over.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly, that's my experience. I think 1.2 tubes, unless you've got a specific deer problem or something, they're not a very good option for tree establishment on the whole, best avoided. The 75/90 question was actually because the tubes that the Woodland Trust suppliers standard are 75, and so I'm going to have to try and persuade them somehow to make 90 ones available, which they may be able to.
It's like a lot of these things that we've kind of discussed. There's never a never with trees. If you had 75cm tree tubes, they would work, but you'd probably find the ones that were nearest the shed were ones that were hard chewed, and they probably end up as bushy, shrubby things. But very quickly, as you got further out into the range, they would work. But in an ideal world, and they're not always standard to find, actually, we tend to order them as a special order at a 900 tube. But that's what we recommend, certainly.
Okay, thanks. My sort of second question is in terms of the ammonia and the shelter belts and the conifer species. You mentioned pine. What about spruce? In that, maybe that's even got a better sort of leaf area for mopping up ammonia. Do you have thoughts about that?
Yeah, we have used Norway spruce as part of the mix, as the conifer element of the mix in the past as well, Peter. Yeah, because huge surface area, those those sort of trees from there, and that's a possibility.
Right, thanks. I mean, clearly, in a sense, the Scots pine is going to look less out of place or more fits in with the environment than Norway or Sitka spruce. But on the other hand, I just feel that maybe in some situations that's a thing that's going to thrive, survive, and actually pragmatically will work.
I think the key thing is to plant what will grow. If it'll grow well in the area, that's the key thing. If you go on the farm trees to where they do have specific tree types as to different ammonia absorption rates, but it usually involves the faster the tree grows, the more ammonia it absorbs, to be honest.
Yeah.
But either way, you're far better off planting a tree that'll grow in the area than one that's alien to it. Yeah.
Absolutely. I just say I got a comment, and that was just to reinforce I think it's what Paul said about sheep and trees. I've seen more than one scheme which has been completely trashed by sheep, and they somehow managed, even with those 1.2 meter guards, they managed to get their sort of front feet up on the top of the tube and nibble the top off. So, and David, I've been to a talk with yours before, and you said get the sheep out. In fact, they're just, the amount of money you get out of them compared to what you save, and also the potential, I believe, there's a disease you can pick up from the feces of the sheep and affect the hens. I have said this to several egg farmers, and I haven't really got any buy-in on that one, but I keep trying.
They can be absolutely devastating in sheep. An absolute worst case classic scenario is a farmer of ours, big sheep farmer, and his quiet time of year is December time. So he decided he was going to take all his tree tubes off in December. So you get that nice, soft, protected bark that has no resistance at all, is beautifully tasty to absolutely anything, rabbits, anything combined. Then there's a nice sheltered pen for his lambing sheep as they just lambed there. You put them in there and they just destroyed it. 10 years worth of growth was completely dead within 3 weeks. It just completely destroyed, just ate the bark. It can be an absolute nightmare. Cut it, don't put sheep in. There's every reason. Put horses in, let the cattle in for a day, all bad news.
Yeah, I just add to that really that in our area we're a very we're a highly populated sheep area here, and I think it is ringing through now that people aren't putting sheep on their ranges. We don't here, and a lot of our neighbours don't, and we have to vaccinate for erysipelas as well. So yeah, it's just not worth the risk, as you say. It's yeah, definitely not good practice.
Thanks, Peter. Those were really good questions. Anyone else on the call wanting to ask a question of our speakers? Going once. Yes, Nick.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm a forester. I just wondered if any work has been done on shelter break belts where the woodland is already mature, and what the sort of proximity and canopy density has to be the maximum benefit for capturing ammonia, or whether regular thinning will diminish that partly over time, and that you might be having to do further replanting to build up the density where these shelter belts, while they're 20 to 30-year-old, are at the maximum benefit perhaps.
If you want detail on that, the ART project report will be published on the CEH website in the very near future. Bill's been writing it for months and months and months, but I think it's almost there. So we got sight of it last week, was it, Paul?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
For final approval of what was being said about us. But yes, you're right. You don't want to have open canopy in the ammonia absorbing area. It needs to be closed canopy. And what we now as a company have probably gone a little bit further than on the CH website, in that we have a half a dozen, about 10 golden rules as to how you plant for that. Things like we plant fast-growing trees within the first 2 or 3 rows of the next to the chicken shed, so they grow really quickly, so it gets good cover of chickens and encourages them to go out very quickly within a year or two. But when it comes to 10 years down the line and you're felling those trees because you wanted to thin them out a bit, you fell those big tall trees, and they've encouraged an open side of the canopy behind them, so that leaves a nice open side to the canopy to let the plume go right into. That works very well. All the other golden rules we kind of talked about. But yes, if you want the detail of leaf area index and the soil benefits, it's Elena and Bill and Christine at CH to talk to, really.
Thank you, David.
Any last questions?
I've just popped a feedback form in the chat. If people could quickly fill that in for us, that would be brilliant.
Thanks, Ceri. Yes, if you could, it's very simple to do, and I say that as someone who doesn't really like filling in forms, but yes, please fill in this form online while you're here. It won't take you very long, and it'll hopefully inform us for future work that we do in the partnership. I just saw while people are filling out that form, Geraint, you've got a question.
Just on fruiting species, really, planting with biodiversity in mind, etc. But you know, speaking to some farmers, they'd rather see the chickens eating the feed in the sheds rather than maybe be pecking at the fruit. You know, at late summer, autumn. So I don't know what your feelings are on that. On what would you say to any farmers who think that train of thought?
If that's a me, we don't get too upset about it, because things like apples don't have a big issue. They can quite happily eat them. It just means that they won't be eating as much inside, as you say. But other than that, there's not a problem with it. The only don't fancy yew, and willow we plant fast growing outside, but we have had cases in the past where farmers will trim the low branches off and think, well, I'm not going to waste those. I'll put them in the chicken shed for the chickens to play with. And they've got oxalic acid in them, aspirin, effectively. And it burns the tongue. Because what you tend to find is that some hens will just binge feed on these things. And one particular, in fact, it's Christine's unit, one of those that you showed in the Ammonia ART project. Her hens burned all their tongues on the willow trees. So you have to be a little bit careful.
Thanks, Dave. Just to carry on, you did mention carbon in passing. The value of these trees to the carbon footprint for these enterprises is going to be very, very important with net zero targets in the future. I'd advocate that farmers will look at very, very carefully at their potential for locking up carbon prior to any thoughts about entering a carbon market, just to get their carbon footprint in order first.
Particularly for poultry. Yeah. Most of the retailers, we talk to retailers a lot, most of them are concentrating on poultry because it's an easy win. The poultry is certainly laying eggs relatively efficient already. So they look at that as an easy win. So there'll be a lot of pressure on poultry farmers in the next few years to achieve net zero way before the rest of agriculture, is my best guess. So yes, you're right. It all needs thinking about. But the beauty of trees is if you plan them right, they can give you all the benefits.
Exactly. Thank you.
Thanks, Geraint. We've got probably time for one last question if anyone has got a closing question for us. I think, Peter, is your hand up historically?
Yeah, that was historic.
That's an old one. Okay, well, yes, if you can fill out that form for Ceri, she will be forever grateful. So all that remains now is for me to say an absolutely huge thank you for all our speakers sparing time this evening to talk through with us about profiting from planting trees on poultry ranges. Also to Ceri and Byron, who've helped with the technology side of things in the background. Thank you very much to both of you. Hopefully we've all learned something tonight. I certainly have. And I think the big message is really the multiple benefits that planting trees can offer for bird health and welfare, for egg quality, soil health and storage of water, and water and air quality, and the image of farms to consumers, you know, all incredibly important. So thank you very much as well for dialing in the farmers and the partner organisations who've joined us tonight. If you've got any questions after the call, please drop us a line. You can get in touch with Sue Buckingham and she can always pass you on to any of our speakers. We'd love to work with you in the future. So thank you very much, and have a good evening. I'll just leave you with Byron as well.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, diolch yn fawr iawn i chi gyd am ymuno heno gyda ni. Gobeithio bod chi wedi mwynhau y webinar a pob lwc yn y dyfodol. Thank you very much to you all for joining us this evening, and it's great cross-border communication here tonight. So and good luck for you all for the future. Thank you very much. Diolch yn fawr.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you, Byron.